Here goes nothing. This video isn't for someone who's just first hearing of the gospel, but who hasn't heard some form of the gospel in this life, because Jesus Christ, the very least, that name is throughout the world at this point. This video has to do with Paul. Why? It's been on my mind for a while. Paul holds a dear place in my heart, specifically when it comes to Paul's ability to identify the difference between a false gospel and a true gospel. And in a world filled with sects, divisions, schisms, cults, all forms of different views on religion, to me, Paul is very, of all the apostles, he has a very solid reasoning on what a true gospel is. Let's see. My stance. You'll find it other places. Any knowledge I have isn't my knowledge, and I'm sure that this has been written before, because those books have been around for 2,000 years. The way I see it, Paul. Some people think Paul. So in this day and age, some people think Paul was an antichrist and a deceiver. But if you read, there's a reason, because even Cephas, Peter said, Paul writes with the same wisdom in every one of his letters, the wisdom that God gave him. And then Peter said some men distort his wisdom, ultimately to their condemnation and to their destruction. So you can see what some might call Paul an antichrist, but that's because they're not seeing his reasoning. See, Paul was born again. Paul was born of the Spirit. Paul spoke of heavenly things. Paul spoke with a heavenly wisdom. Several times in the New Testament, Paul says, he'll start off a sentence and say, all reason is a human, right? I'll use human reasoning. So what that shows to me is that his normal operation of reasoning was in the spirit reason. The reasoning of God is not the reasoning of man. And why should it be? If we're dealing with the book of God here, if we're dealing with apostles and saints and the Holy Spirit, a new being, a being born again, then why shouldn't there be a different way of reasoning things? And it's a humbling way of reasoning things, I would say, but that's besides the point. Paul, I say, was a mystic in the sense that he understood the mystery of Christ. He knew he was a vessel of God. He understood. What did he understand? He understood God's wrath and his mercy, his grace, his infinite grace. That's why he said, where there was more sin, the more sin abounded, when the gospel would come there, the more grace abounded, right? So God's grace could cover so many sins. But that's where people start to think Paul was advocating sinning for the purpose of more grace. But see, that was missing the point. That was human reasoning. To say that is human reasoning. Oh, if there's more grace when we sin, let's sin more. No, but they're not looking through the lens Paul was looking through. Paul was looking through a lens of the Spirit, a lens of wrath and mercy, a lens of divine justice of sorts, as far as I can see.